Millions of guns, dozens of countries, one man. For decades, the international arms trade was dominated by a single name. He supplied firearms to anyone willing to buy them, whether they ended up in revolutions or above the fireplace mantle. His exploits were so infamous that they could be found in books and movies, and yet today, his name is only remembered by a few. This is the story of Interarms and its founder, Sam Cummings, the most powerful private arms dealer of the 20th century. Born in 1927 outside of Philadelphia, Samuel Cummings came from a wealthy British family. However, the stock market crash of 1929 erased the entire family fortune, leaving them destitute. Sam's father attempted to keep the family afloat by opening an electrical supply store, but tragedy struck yet again when he died only a few years later. Thus, it was left to his mother to support the family throughout Sam's childhood, finding work renovating and flipping houses in the DC and Philadelphia area. Cummings' fascination with firearms began earlier than most. When he was only 5 years old, he found a rusty Maxim machine gun lying discarded outside an American Legion post. Fascinated by the device, he dragged it all the way home on his wagon and spent hours dismantling it and putting it back together over and over again. The experience left a massive impression on Sam, and throughout his career he often credited it as the spark that ignited a lifetime of adventures. Cummings was drafted into the United States Army at the end of World War II, using his already extensive firearms knowledge to serve stateside as an infantry sergeant and weapons instructor. When his service ended, he used the GI Bill to attend George Washington University, where he spent a brief period touring post-war Europe. It was here that the kernels of his future were found, as Cummings discovered the vast quantities of military surplus being discarded throughout the continent. Seeing it as a tragic loss of potential profits, Sam lamented that he did not have the funds to take advantage of this opportunity. Following graduation, he began working towards a law degree until he was recruited in 1950 by the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency. For decades, Cummings stated publicly that his work at the CIA was fairly inconsequential, consisting mainly of work as a weapons expert responsible for identifying and evaluating small arms captured during the Korean War. The story went that this only lasted a few years before Sam resigned to open Interarms, wanting to try his hand at dealing with all those piles of surplus laying in Europe. However, documents revealed in 2025 show that Cummings' time in the CIA and Interarms were actually far more intertwined than that. In truth, Cummings' talents with firearms and familiarity with Europe had soon caught the attention of the head of the CIA, Allen Dulles. By 1952, Sam had moved over to the Office of Procurement and Supply, where he secretly began working as a supplier for many of the CIA's projects around the world. Posing as a Hollywood producer buying firearms for movie productions, he acquired countless firearms across Europe to then be funneled to militias in places such as Guatemala and Taiwan. As the pile of guns Sam and the CIA were moving around the globe grew larger and larger, it quickly became clear that they needed a better cover story, and thus the International Armament Corporation, better known as Interarm Co., was born. Centered just outside of Washington along the waterfront of Alexandria, Virginia, the company would be a CIA front with Sam as the public face, acting as a private arms dealer. In those early years, he could be found all around the world, whether that be buying guns in Scandinavia or selling guns to groups in places like Panama, Nicaragua, and the Dominican Republic. By 1958, Cummings was confident that he could operate independently and bought the CIA out of their share of Interarms to venture off on his own. With little more than a post office box and an international network of contacts, he soon began building what would become arguably the most influential arms trading company to ever exist. Cummings recognized the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that laid before him. World War II had necessitated an unbelievable amount of firepower, but new wars needed new weapons, and pallets of now obsolete firearms were sitting in warehouses around the world. At the same time, millions of Americans had just received first-hand training on firearms and had cash to spend thanks to a booming economy. Sam knew just what to do to make his dreams come true. He quickly got to work buying enormous stockpiles of weaponry. His CIA experience and connections, as well as family connections, found Sam well positioned with political circles to navigate the global firearms firearms marketplace. In 1959, Cummings famously bought all of Spain's military surplus, which some say included over 1 million firearms, for $1 million. Another $1 million deal bought in 600,000 surplus Enfield rifles from England. More and more deals soon followed. Ships were coming into Alexandria weekly to drop off piles of guns. The Alexandria waterfront became the home of 9 warehouses, totaling over 100,000 square feet. Interarms soon swelled to a team of over 200 employees with multiple headquarters throughout the globe. At one point, it is said that 85% of all guns passing through both America and Britain came in Interarms crates. And as the ships kept coming into the docks of Alexandria, Cummings' ever-growing Interarms needed to get rid of guns as fast as they were coming in. Employees such as Tom Nelson, who years later would make his own legend with Collector's Armory, were incentivized to sell to dealers across the country. This even included selling to a young Charles Steen, who laid the groundwork for Sarco with his weekly trips down to the Interarms warehouses. But Sam dreamed bigger than simply wholesaling his guns to other dealers. Domestically, Interarms dove into print media, running ads in magazines throughout the country advertising his military surplus, often a fraction of the cost of a new Winchester or Remington rifle. Americans could buy real World War II surplus rifles from Interarms, and their subsidiaries like Hunter's Lodge shipped to their front door. Even more dramatically, on the international stage, Cummings sought any customer he could find, whether they were governments, militias, or rebel groups. Every day came with some new group calling, asking for Sam to provide them with weapons, including tales like selling 100 AR-10s to Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista, only to then have Fidel Castro capture the guns en route. The story goes that Sam wrote to Castro and said he could keep what he had captured, but that Sam expected Castro to pay for them. Cummings was eventually paid, and they even made plans to supply Castro with additional rifles before an arms embargo stopped it. The 1960s brought uncertainty to the military surplus industry, and despite his size and influence, Sam Cummings was not spared from this. Shortly afterward, in the wake of the JFK assassination, Congress passed the Gun Control Act of 1968, which included massive new restrictions on the import of military weapons. Never one to miss an opportunity, Cummings had anticipated the impact would have and ensured Interarms' warehouses were full with more than 700,000 guns ready to keep American buyers stocked with surplus weapons for years to come. However, even that many guns couldn't last forever, and with foreign weapons becoming harder and harder to import, Sam and Interarms needed to adapt by expanding its role within the firearms industry. In 1973, Interarms began producing a series of single-action revolvers under its own name at a manufacturing facility in Midland, Virginia. Named the Virginian Dragoon, Sam drew inspiration from the classic Colt single-action army design while incorporating improvements such as an improved Swiss safety that allowed the gun to be safe even while cocked. Much to the surprise of everyone but Cummings, the regulation brought on by the GCA had not at all diminished American demand for surplus and foreign guns. Interarms continued to import and distribute a wide range of approved foreign firearms from manufacturers including Mauser, Rossi, Astra, and Star, making its Alexandria warehouse as one of the most important distribution centers in the American firearms market. Furthermore, in the late 1970s, Interarms became the exclusive US distributor for Walther. Working with American companies such as Ranger Manufacturing in Alabama, Interarms domestically imported hundreds of thousands of Walther PPKs under this license, ensuring their continued availability for American buyers. Eventually, however, all things must come to an end. By the 1990s, the piles of surplus from his youth had all but dried up, and a post-Cold War world had largely moved on from the so-called Merchant of Menace. Despite still operating on a global scale, Cummings spent his later years mostly retired, dividing his time between apartments in Washington, the Swiss Alps, and Monte Carlo. When he died at the age of 71 in 1998 from a series of strokes, he was widely regarded as the world's largest private arms dealer, leaving behind not only a vast fortune, but a private collection that included incredible treasures such as the sword Napoleon had carried at the Battle of Waterloo. Following Sam Cummings' death, Interarms gradually came to an end. His family chose not to continue the business, and by 1999 the company had been fully dissolved with its remaining assets sold. While his name may be known to few today, Sam Cummings left an undeniable mark on the world. Interarms is remembered not simply as a firearms company, but as a central force in the globalization of the modern arms trade. Countless firearms across the world bear its stamp, showing just how far one man's reach can shape markets, influence collectors, and leave a lasting imprint on the history of small arms in the 20th century. If you enjoyed today's video, please take 2 seconds to subscribe so that you don't miss our next video. You never know what we'll discover next.